Chapter 1. My husband, General Hayes, was stationed in the far reaches of the northern frontier. Despite his demanding duties, he found a few stolen moments of leisure, falling deeply in love with another woman. Meanwhile, I, his wife, had been alone in our home for 6 long years. This woman was captivating and beautiful, a skilled warrior who could ride 1,000 miles and wield a spear with mastery. She was well versed in military strategy, fighting alongside my husband and slaying enemies on the battlefield. The townsfolk and soldiers on the frontier honored her as the general's wife, while I, his true wife, remained unknown to all. He was like an eagle of the north, soaring through the sky, and I, a caged bird within our lavish estate. Disaster, however, was quietly approaching. 6 years into my marriage with the Marquis of Spencer's heir, I received a gift from my husband. Inside a silk box was a heartfelt letter. My heart swelled with joy. On the day I received it, the world seemed to open up before me, but this happiness was short-lived. The very next day, I heard that he was in trouble. My husband, Charles Hayes, the son of the Marquis of Spencer and a brigadier general, was accused of colluding with a northern tribal princess, suspected of treason, though there was no concrete evidence. The emperor was furious. The Hayes family was stripped of their titles and ranks. My father-in-law, Lord Spencer, held influence in court and was a cousin of the Empress Dowager. They had grown up together, deeply bonded like siblings. Many officials pleaded on my husband's behalf, and the Empress Dowager intervened. The Spencer estate was spared from confiscation, though our imperial residence was reclaimed, and we were given 3 days to vacate. The main house was in chaos. My father-in-law fell ill with rage, drifting in and out of consciousness. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Spencer, began packing and dismissing surplus servants. When I went to the main house, she asked me, "Are you all packed, Evelyn?" "Yes, I am," I replied. My in-laws treated me like their own daughter, and I never shied away. I sat by my father-in-law's bedside and performed acupuncture. After about 20 minutes, he slowly regained consciousness and coughed up a thick phlegm. Tears streamed down his face. "That ungrateful son," he wailed. "I should have beaten him to death." "Please, father, take care of yourself," I urged him. "We still have a long way to go." Our entire family, including my 4 younger brothers-in-law, 2 of whom were still unmarried, and 2 sisters-in-law, depended on my father-in-law. Once he composed himself, he was helped by his second son to the outer courtyard to arrange the move. We moved from our spacious, luxurious estate near the heart of the capital to a crowded alley. The new house was decent but nowhere near as grand as the estate. I was given a secluded and elegant small courtyard in the northwest, called Bamboo Hall. Half a month later, my husband was brought home. When I saw him again, he looked utterly defeated, covered in wounds. His right hand was particularly damaged, almost useless. My father-in-law, who had been carried back by his trusted men, cursed him. My mother-in-law watched with cold indifference. My younger brothers and sisters hid in the back. "Find a courtyard for him to recuperate," my father-in-law ordered. "I don't think that's wise," I interjected. "First, let's send him to the palace so His Majesty can see him." My father-in-law hesitated. He feared the emperor's unpredictable temper, and provoking him could have dire consequences. I insisted, "Even if His Majesty inflicts further punishment, if he can vent his anger, we will have a chance to rise again. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in this alley forever." My mother-in-law always supported me. "Send this rebellious son to the south gate of the palace," she agreed. "If His Majesty refuses to see him, at least other officials passing by will see him in this state." He had suffered a crushing defeat, and his appearance was disheveled. He was a general who had made a name for himself in his youth, but now one of his hands was crippled. He was dejected, his eyes unfocused, like a living corpse. Given the lack of concrete evidence for his alleged collusion with the northern tribes, the emperor's punishment of the Hayes family seemed overly harsh. The Hayes family carried my husband to the south gate, my in-laws, my 2 adult brothers-in-law, and I knelt there. The emperor refused to see us and sent a high-ranking eunuch to rebuke us. I refused to leave. Because of my persistence, my in-laws also knelt with me. Officials passing by whispered amongst themselves, giving us a wide berth. No one dared to speak to us. The night grew very cold, freezing enough to turn water into ice. My husband lay on a straw mat, his face gradually turning blue. He, too, was freezing, but he remained motionless. At midnight, the small palace gate opened. The Empress Dowager, dressed in elegant robes, appeared. A young eunuch held a lantern, illuminating us as he said, "Go back." The Empress Dowager heard you were still kneeling and weeping. The Emperor was furious. The Crown Prince himself came out. "It's time to know when to quit." I helped my mother-in-law to her feet and had my two brothers-in-law carry my semi-crippled husband, preparing to return. But the Crown Prince called out to me, "Evelyn, don't be reckless, serve your in-laws well." He was my cousin, my mother being a cousin of his mother, the Empress consort. I bowed and prepared to leave. He called out again, "Evelyn." I stopped and looked back. His face was obscured by the shadows of the south gate's eaves. He was tall and slender, and the eunuch's lantern didn't reach his face. "It's cold at night. Hurry back," he urged. I bowed again and withdrew. Our home in the alley was indeed cramped. My two underage brothers-in-law shared one room, and my two younger sisters-in-law shared an even smaller one. There were no extra rooms. I agreed to let Charles Hayes recuperate in the west wing of Bamboo Hall. For the next few weeks, the capital buzzed with discussions about the Hayes family. Charles Hayes remained a living corpse, refusing to eat, drink, or move. His parents cursed and blamed him, yet they also worried themselves sick, unable to eat or sleep. I questioned his trusted aide, who told me about the general's beloved mistress. She had been with him for over 5 years, had fought in battles, earned merits, was resourceful, and skilled in military strategy. She had even suffered 2 miscarriages. "She's not a spy, nor is she a northern tribal princess," the aide insisted. Then he immediately regretted his words, glancing nervously at me. I knew Charles Hayes had been fighting in the northern frontier for 6 years, not just against the northern tribes, but because he had a family there. "But the court believes she is a northern tribal princess," I said. The aide became agitated, asserting it was absolutely impossible. "Then why such a crushing defeat?" I asked him. The aide said our side had a traitor who stole the battle plans. "Have they found the traitor yet?" This massive defeat resulted in the loss of over half of our 300,000 troops and 2 cities. The court had to replace the general on the front lines to stabilize the situation and reclaim the lost towns. Charles Hayes was a criminal. Perhaps his 100 victories on the battlefield had made him arrogant, leading to such a grave error. The court didn't execute him or confiscate our family's assets. The Emperor's grace to the Hayes family and the royal family is truly immense. On the 9th day of Charles Hayes playing dead, I had someone throw him into the courtyard. It was the dead of winter, with icicles hanging like curtains from the eaves. The courtyard was bone-chillingly cold. I personally splashed a bucket of cold water on him. He finally moved. Sun Bin, though crippled, devised brilliant strategies. Sima Qian, castrated, penned a timeless history. "You've only lost the use of your right hand. You're still whole," I told him. "If you don't freeze to death in the courtyard tonight, clean yourself up tomorrow morning and train your left hand." Charles Hayes spent the night freezing in the courtyard. The next day, he had a high fever. His emotion was no longer indifference, but anger. I gave him a purple blood pill to reduce his fever. He vented his emotions, then composed himself, changed into clean clothes, and knelt before his parents. He admitted his wrongdoing. He had caused great suffering to the soldiers who had followed him for years, the frontier people, and his own parents. His parents no longer cursed him but simply told him, "If you have been wronged, stand up and seek revenge. Don't die in such a cowardly manner and bring eternal disgrace to the Hayes family." I began acupuncture and blood circulation treatments for Charles Hayes's right hand. I also invited the finest shortsword master in the province to teach him how to use his left hand. Life continued this way. It was the 3rd month of the 2nd year, when spring flowers were blooming, that his right hand could finally hold chopsticks. He asked me, "Is your name Evelyn?" I smiled slightly. "No, my nickname is Evelyn, but I'm not Evelyn Hayes. I'm not even a Hayes. My full name is Isabella White." I told Charles Hayes truthfully. His expression was calm, showing no abnormality. He simply nodded and said, "I've noted it." Then he asked, "Isabella, why did you marry me?" "My mother's wish," I replied. He asked, "I remember the night before our wedding. I was ordered to go to war. You married my surrogate, my second brother holding my ceremonial robes. After 6 years, why didn't you leave?" I remained silent. He answered himself, "It was your mother's wish too." "No, it was my own decision," I told him. He seemed a little perplexed. He was once the most celebrated young man in the capital. He went to war at 3 years old, wielding a 60-pound saber with one hand to slay enemies, making a name for himself throughout the land. He was the Marquis of Spencer's heir and the Empress Dowager's cousin. He inherited his mother's handsome features, exceptionally refined. He was invincible in battle and brilliantly clever. Every woman in the gentry spoke of him. I came from a prominent family, my mother's lineage illustrious, which allowed me to stand out among many young women and become Charles Hayes's wife. "You're still young," he said, "perhaps you should leave. You don't have to suffer with us." I knew he was testing me and didn't answer. He then asked, "Master Zhou said he taught me not because he values your family background, but because he values your talent. How do you know such a renowned swordsman?" I answered this question. His daughter was on the verge of death. I cured her. "You're skilled in medicine?" he asked. Because of me, his right hand could now hold chopsticks. It was the result of my acupuncture. "I'm also skilled in embroidery," I added. He smiled, a faint smile, like a subtle ripple on the surface of a lake touched by a breeze. It was the first time he had smiled since he returned injured. Major events continued to occur in the court. The northern tribal kingdom once again harassed the frontier. The general who replaced Charles Hayes was assassinated by the northern tribesmen. The court was deeply troubled by this, and the emperor resented Charles Hayes even more, believing he had colluded with and enriched the northern tribes, exacerbating the border problem. There were also corrupt officials within the court. Life in the alley passed slowly. Charles Hayes was patient, practicing daily with his left hand on his saber and recovering the strength in his right hand. I cultivated a small vegetable patch behind Bamboo Hall. He said the maids and servants didn't dig deep enough to plant properly, so he personally tilled the soil for a day, sweating profusely. From that day on, we would take walks outside the alley in the evenings, chatting about trivial matters. We had fields and shops, so we had no worries about food and drink, but our relatives and friends had grown distant. After the Dragon Boat Festival, his right hand could lift an 8-pound short saber. My mother-in-law was delighted and wanted to take me to the temple to fulfill a vow. Originally, my third brother-in-law was supposed to escort her, but he was unexpectedly called out by a classmate to play. The classmate had a beautiful, lively younger sister. My mother-in-law told my third brother-in-law to go quickly and not waste time. Charles Hayes took over the escort duty himself. "I will escort Mother and Evelyn," he said. My mother-in-law was even happier. However, the day we went to the temple, the weather was extremely hot and humid. My mother-in-law woke up feeling unwell. "How can we not go?" I asked. "We cannot break our promise to the Buddha." My mother-in-law said, "You can go on my behalf." So Charles Hayes and I went up the mountain. Even though I had a sedan chair, carried by house servants, I was still drenched in sweat. Not long after we began our ascent, lightning flashed, thunder roared, and heavy rain poured down. Early summer rains usually stopped quickly, but for some reason, this one wouldn't cease. Large raindrops fell for 4 hours straight. The southwest corner of the temple's main hall was damaged, and the side rooms collapsed, making the back wall uninhabitable. As dusk approached, the trapped pilgrims were politely advised by the monks that there was no more room. Most of the side rooms were leaking, and no one stayed in the Buddhist hall at night. We also had to leave. Charles Hayes looked at the mountain path, which was clearly washed out by the rain, and said to me, "The sedan chair bearers might lose their footing, and I would fall into the ravine, chair and all. And I can't walk the slippery, muddy mountain path myself." I paused slightly. Charles Hayes asked, "You're good at medicine and embroidery, but are you good at dancing?" I shook my head. "Come, my dear wife, your husband will carry you." It was the first time he had joked with me. I assessed the situation. We had to leave. The only question was whether he would carry me or the sedan chair bearers. I clung to his back, feeling the mud beneath his feet. Several times, he nearly slipped, walking cautiously. Later, I traversed this mountain path myself many times without incident, but this time, the journey was different. By the time we returned to the alley, it was dark. My mother-in-law was waiting at the entrance, having waited for who knew how long, her skirt soaked through. We returned to Bamboo Hall to change. I vaguely noticed that his blue trousers were stained with mud, and the color looked wrong. He spent a long time in the dressing room and emerged with his trousers looking baggy. "Come here." I called him to my bedroom. He hesitated slightly at the doorway. A faint, calming scent filled the room. His expression softened. I told him to pull up his trousers. He complied. His left calf had been scratched by a mountain rock. After the heavy rain, the sharp stones were sharper than knives. The cut was long and deep, still bleeding. He had roughly bandaged it, like a battlefield dressing. It's nothing, he said. I can handle external injuries. I told him I had a better hemostatic medicine. He let me treat his wound. When I finished, he paused for a moment, then stood up and said, "I'm going back." I nodded. His retreating figure didn't seem as decisive. I turned my back to him, tidying my medicine box. From that day on, we became more familiar, like two swallows sharing the same eaves. We would talk and chat. I never hinted at him sleeping in my bedroom, and he acted as if it wasn't an issue. My in-laws never even brought it up. One of my maids, who had served me for years and was usually very well behaved, suddenly went mad while Charles Hayes was bathing. She tried to wipe his back and touched his body. Charles Hayes instantly threw her out the window. The maid fell onto the courtyard ground and fainted, not waking for a long time. My mother-in-law heard about it and immediately sold the maid. The people in Bamboo Hall became even more well-behaved. In the alley, no one mentioned it anymore. Charles Hayes and I were, after all, husband and wife. Behind Bamboo Hall was once a lotus pond, which had since been filled in and converted into Charles Hayes's small training ground. Besides his own training with the swordsman Master Zhou to learn left-handed swordplay, he also brought his younger brothers to practice martial arts and strengthen their bodies. My small vegetable garden was separated from the training ground by a wall. In the evenings, they would train in the cool air. I, accompanied by a heavy-set maid, would water the vegetable patch while it was cool. "Brother, I heard your mistress is a stunning beauty, skilled in both literature and martial arts. Is that true?" I overheard my third brother-in-law ask. My third brother-in-law was always simple-minded and didn't understand nuances. Charles Hayes answered, "She's dead, and she wasn't a mistress. She was your sister-in-law." My third brother-in-law said, "My sister-in-law? My sister-in-law is alive and well. How dare you curse her?" The two brothers began to argue. My third brother-in-law was curious, but he also defended me. In these past few years, we had grown more like a family. Charles Hayes, who had not been home for 6 years, was a stranger. At dinner that night, I heard that my third brother-in-law had punched Charles Hayes. I pretended I hadn't heard anything. In August, osmanthus flowers bloomed in the capital, filling the city with their sweet fragrance. On the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, the Empress Dowager sent mooncakes and fruits. Well-informed families caught wind of the changing tides, and gradually, people began to visit our alley. I advised my in-laws to refuse visitors. My father-in-law, a second-generation aristocrat, had gained his title through his cousin, the Empress Dowager, and had never held an official position in his life. My mother-in-law was a lady from a prominent family, confined to the inner quarters. For the past 6 or 7 years, I had repeatedly offered advice to the Hayes family. The Empress Dowager had praised me many times. My in-laws always trusted my words implicitly. Because we stayed home, my in-laws were in good health. The younger generation grew restless. My third brother-in-law wanted to go hunting. My mother-in-law asked for my opinion. "The famous mountain in the western suburbs is my uncle's property," I said. "He also enjoys hunting and raises some pheasants and rabbits on the mountain. If you'd like to go, I'll tell him." My uncle was a playboy who spent money lavishly, but he was very kind to his nieces and nephews. I sent a servant to tell him, and my uncle readily agreed. On August 27th, the Hayes family rode out. My 2 unmarried sisters-in-law and I rode in a carriage to watch. Surprisingly, Charles Hayes also wanted to go. The previous evening, I had casually asked, "Would you like to come along?" He had nodded without hesitation. "Good," he said. Perhaps he wanted to relax too. Mount Min was relatively flat, with a maximum height of less than 650 feet, making the entire mountain suitable for horseback riding and hunting. My uncle's people had released 50 wild rabbits, 50 pheasants, and 2 deer in advance. My 2 sisters-in-law played at the farmhouse at the foot of the mountain, picking osmanthus flowers and collecting lotus pods with the tenant farmer's children. I rode a horse, lightly armed, and intended to hunt as well. Charles Hayes asked, "Are you good at riding and archery?" My third brother-in-law answered for me. "My sister-in-law is excellent at polo." I simply said, "It's just a pastime." Charles Hayes didn't say anything, but he stayed close to me. The mountain breeze was light and cool, gently blowing through my hair, wonderfully pleasant. "Mother and father told me a lot about you," Charles Hayes suddenly said. "They must have praised me endlessly, right?" "They couldn't stop praising you," he replied. "If it weren't for the Hayes family these past few years, we would have been swept into factional disputes twice." "I only did my best," I said. He still seemed a little perplexed. why didn't you leave? I smiled. Once you recover and regain your official position, and the Hayes family's title is restored, I will leave. The autumn sun filtered through the treetops, casting dappled light on his face. His expression was quiet for a moment. After a long pause, he said, "You actually believe I can clear my name?" "I believe it," I said, my tone firm and unwavering. "The innocent will always be cleared." Charles Hayes smiled. He was handsome, and his tanned skin added a ruggedness to his features, making him look strong and unyielding. "Good," he said. "I believe it too." "Isabella." He called my name. A deer galloped past. He unslung the bow from his back and casually shot an arrow. A crisp sound echoed through the forest. The young deer fell behind a nearby tree. "Even your left hand is so accurate with an arrow," I said. He said he had practiced archery since childhood and could use both hands. He slightly raised his face, looking at the sky. "Apes, little birds, migrating geese," he murmured. He took out his long sword, aimed carefully at the sky for a moment, and then unleashed a swift strike. A dark silhouette plummeted to the ground. He smiled. "We have game." He rode off to retrieve it. I lingered in place, striking a wild rabbit, and had the servant following me pick it up. Charles Hayes returned then. He handed me the game. "It's dead, but it's fresh. This is what I owe you," he said, handing me a plump goose. Marriage rituals traditionally used a wild goose as a betrothal gift. I held it for a moment, then looked up and asked him, "Do you remember writing me a letter once?" He paused slightly. "I sent a letter home every 6 months. Which one are you referring to?" I smiled faintly. I didn't say anything more and handed the goose to the servant to carry. Charles Hayes followed behind, then explained, "The letters were never written by me, but by a military scribe." I nodded. "I understand." The letter I received had slightly messy handwriting and strong, vigorous strokes. It was written in his own hand. Perhaps too much had happened before and after that letter, and it was just a minor detail he didn't care about. He had forgotten it. Everyone enjoyed the hunt that day. However, on our way back to the city, we encountered the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was in civilian clothes, as if out for a stroll. Charles Hayes and I, along with everyone else, dismounted and bowed. The Crown Prince, with his fair complexion, smiled gently. "Were you hunting?" Everyone responded. The Crown Prince then looked at me. "Evelyn, your sleeve is torn." I looked down and saw that my left sleeve had been snagged by a tree branch. I hadn't noticed, nor had Charles Hayes, who had been following me, or the maid who was with the carriage, or my younger brothers and sisters. Only the Crown Prince's gaze was sharp. "Thank you for reminding me, Your Highness," I said. The Crown Prince turned his horse and rode away. That evening, Charles Hayes and I ate in Bamboo Hall. He mentioned the Crown Prince. "He seems a bit too refined, doesn't he?" he said. I couldn't help but laugh. "What? Have you been away from the capital for 6 years and don't know the Crown Prince's methods? He's outwardly refined but inwardly ruthless. He holds grudges," I said. I simply recounted a small incident. Years ago, when the Crown Prince was choosing a consort, he chose my cousin, but the Zhou family interfered. The emperor then betrothed the Zhou family's daughter to the Crown Prince. Less than 2 years later, the Crown Prince's consort, the Zhou family's daughter, passed away. The Crown Prince then systematically dismantled the Zhou family. He's quite malicious too, isn't he? Charles Hayes smiled. His expression relaxed. The first day of September was my birthday. My family sent generous gifts. The Empress Dowager also sent a gift. The Crown Prince even sent 20 bolts of the finest silk for me to make clothes. My in-laws all had gifts. Even the senior maid in my courtyard made me a pair of shoes. Only Charles Hayes had nothing. My third brother-in-law reminded him, lamenting that he hadn't eaten, and left Bamboo Hall. Just as I was about to go to sleep, he finally returned, carrying a small palace lantern. The lantern depicted beautiful women, exquisite and elegant, filled with thousands of fireflies, shining brightly. It was difficult to find fireflies in early September. It was admirable that he had gone to such effort. My housekeeper looked at me intently, wanting to say something, but I stopped her. I reached out and took it, saying softly, "Thank you." Charles Hayes smiled. "From now on, I will celebrate your birthday with you every year." I smiled too. The palace lantern hung under the eaves for a moment. Then I released the fireflies. It was an act of kindness. My mother-in-law heard about the situation in Bamboo Hall and called me to her. "Evelyn, what are your thoughts?" I handed her that letter. My mother-in-law's hands trembled slightly after reading it. She asked me if there was any chance of reconciliation. I gently shook my head. My mother-in-law looked at me quietly, her eyes welling up with tears. She loved me, like a second mother. A mother would never want to make her daughter suffer, so she said nothing, only gently squeezed my hand. I spent the new year in anticipation. Although the Hayes family had been relegated to the alley, the year-end wasn't too difficult. In fact, it was easier with fewer social obligations. But this new year, Charles Hayes and I were in a silent quarrel. Charles Hayes wanted to share my bed. He subtly expressed this desire. I just stood there, my expression distant, showing little emotion. No, I said. Perhaps those two words were too direct and harsh. He turned and went back to the West Wing and didn't return. On New Year's Day, he greeted his parents and then left. In the days that followed, he stopped greeting me and didn't eat with me. I asked Master Zhou and learned that Charles Hayes's training was going well. His left hand could now wield a 30-pound-long saber, and his right hand was still not strong enough, but his technique was more refined. Master Zhou said, "I'm very satisfied. He'll be well soon." Master Zhou continued, "Then, before the falcon's wings are fully grown, hold on to him and soar with him through the 9 heavens. Ordinary people won't be able to catch up." I knew Master Zhou's intentions and smiled. Charles Hayes is a talent, a pillar, I said. His downfall was his excessive pride, and this setback was too devastating. He needs someone to help him get back on his feet. You are that person, madam, Master Zhou said. I shook my head. You are. After the new year, the Crown Prince unexpectedly visited the alley, terrifying everyone in the Hayes family. The household frantically prepared to receive the Crown Prince, who was traveling incognito. The Crown Prince was humble and refined, simply smiling and saying, "The Empress Dowager ordered me to come and see how General Hayes's injuries are." Charles Hayes had developed his left hand, and his right hand, while still unable to wield a 60-pound saber, could handle 20 pounds. In over a year, he had shed his old, broken skin and grown new shoots. Train well, and the court will still use you, the Crown Prince said. I was surprised by this. I spent some money to inquire around and found out that the northern frontier had suffered another defeat. The northern tribal kingdom was now fully committed to invading the interior, seeking more fertile land. The generals sent to command had all been lost, and almost no one could defeat them. The northern army needed a general familiar with the northern terrain and understanding of the northern tribal kingdom. Some court officials, at the Empress Dowager's behest, mentioned Charles Hayes. The rumors about Charles Hayes and the northern tribal princess remained just rumors, with no concrete evidence. The emperor had punished the Hayes family, and they had meekly accepted their fate, remaining extraordinarily low-key for over a year. The emperor's heart was unpredictable. My initial act of feigned misery had planted a seed in the emperor's mind. In just 1 year, the emperor once again thought of Charles Hayes and sent the crown prince to see if he was alive or dead. 2 months later, when spring flowers bloomed, Charles Hayes's left hand could already defeat Master Zhou's right hand. He had mastered the long saber. He had extraordinary talent and was willing to endure hardship. He was a born general. The emperor summoned him. Just as the 6th commander on the northern frontier had died, the emperor was furious. He swore to annihilate the northern tribal kingdom. He reinstated Charles Hayes. The emperor gave Charles Hayes a death order. He must either conquer the northern tribal kingdom or die. Not only he would die, but the entire Hayes clan would be executed. Charles Hayes was reinstated to his former position and led the army to war. Before he left, he burst into my bedroom and hugged me tightly. He said, "Evelyn, when I return victoriously, will you and I have a future?" I nodded, yes. In over a year, the court had lost 6 generals, which fueled the northern tribal kingdom's arrogance. They grew bolder. Charles Hayes learned from his previous mistakes, and in less than 4 months, he led his army directly to conquer the tribal capital. When the news reached the capital, the court and common people were elated. He was once again hailed as the great general, and everyone proudly discussed his achievements. The threshold of our alley was almost worn down by visitors. The capital's powerful families loved to add to the splendor. The emperor even declared he would confer upon him the title of prince. He had rendered great service to the nation. It was another mid-autumn festival. Charles Hayes's army returned to the capital. His aide returned first to deliver the news to his family. I specifically kept him behind and asked him, "Was the general injured?" The new aide said, "No." I then asked, "Was the general's mistress found in the northern tribal capital?" The aide paused. The general said that if the madam asked, I should tell her the truth. Did she return? The general beheaded her, he said. She was indeed a northern tribal princess. Fearing complications, the general used the head of another maid to impersonate her. Her head was destroyed. The aide was even afraid I wouldn't believe him. I believed him. Love was a small matter. National hatred and family vengeance were serious offenses. Charles Hayes knew which to choose. Charles Hayes had not yet reached the capital when the Hayes family's title was restored. The grand residence near the heart of the capital was refurbished by the Ministry of Works. They even meticulously renovated the entire house. My in-laws, along with my younger brothers and sisters, went to see it and were very excited. "We're moving," they exclaimed. The nearly 2 years of hardship were over. My father-in-law excitedly told me, "Evelyn, you were right. We've turned things around." The family began to pack their belongings again. We didn't have enough servants and needed to buy a new batch. My mother-in-law was busy looking for brokers. Bamboo Hall was also packed. On the day Charles Hayes returned victoriously, our alley home was also ready for the move. On the day of his triumphal entry, he presented his captives at the Meridian Gate. Everyone in the capital went to watch, jamming the streets. I didn't go. The Imperial Palace hosted a banquet for Charles Hayes. Charles Hayes had a good alcohol tolerance but claimed his old wounds hadn't healed and didn't touch a drop. He returned to the alley. He first paid his respects to his parents, then rushed back. The moment he entered, he hugged me tightly. He had taken off his armor, thoroughly washed, and changed into civilian clothes. He smelled of soap. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe. After a long moment, he released me and tried to kiss me, but I turned my head to the side. He looked at me steadily. "Evelyn, you promised me, when I returned, we would have a future." I smiled faintly. I remembered Charles Hayes hadn't forced me, but instead asked when we were moving. I told him I'd ask his aide to help. "No." I shook my head. "My brother will bring people to help me move." "You have a brother?" he asked with a smile. I nodded. He sat down, took my hand, and pulled me into his embrace. Seating me on his lap, he said, "Evelyn, thank you. If I hadn't fallen in love with you, I wouldn't have been able to kill Yuan again." His mistress was indeed a northern tribal spy who had been lurking for years. She was a royal family member who was later titled a princess by the northern tribal kingdom after their success. My expression remained unchanged as I listened, simply asking him, "General, you fell in love with me?" He looked at me deeply, his eyes seeing no one but me. His emotions were fervent and profound. "Do you know my name?" I asked with a smile. He looked puzzled. "Didn't you say your name was Isabella White?" I smiled. "Actually, my name is Evelyn Hayes." He paused slightly. "But in over a year in the capital, you never thought to inquire about me, not even a little. You fell in love with a woman who was willing to support you, regardless of who she was or what her name was. You don't love me," I said. I stood up from his embrace. I took out a letter and handed it to him. "General," I said, 2 years ago, you wrote me a divorce decree. I wasn't divorced. I'm divorcing Charles Hayes, the great general of the western frontier, with my dowry, the betrothal gifts given to me by the Hayes family, and the private wealth I've accumulated over the years. 2 years ago, when he ran into trouble, he was deeply in love with his mistress, Yuan, and intended to marry her. He wrote me a divorce decree. The decree was a standard template written by a military scribe, which he merely copied without giving it much thought. After writing the decree, he sent it to his subordinates to mail, and then he ran into trouble. He didn't remember the trivial matters before and after his accident. He didn't think there was anything wrong with divorcing a wife he had never met. He hadn't considered my difficulties. But now, he liked me very much, or so he said. He said it was I who made him forget Yuan, and it was I who helped him get back on his feet. I believed that emotions were like a surging spring in the mind. They could emerge at any time. Our interactions over the past 2 years, where I believed I had treated him kindly in every way, made his development of feelings natural. However, I didn't need them. Initially, he refused the divorce. My mother-in-law slapped him and questioned him. She was a widow for 6 years. "Where were you enjoying yourself?" He had no words. He only said he would be good to me in the future. My mother-in-law then said, "Do you know she's afraid of insects, including fireflies?" He was speechless. My mother-in-law further asked him, "Do you love her so much that you want to shackle her? Was it the same when you were infatuated with that mistress?" He remained silent. On the day I moved, he stood at the doorway, seeing me off, his eyes looking at me timidly. I smiled at him. I always held respect for him, not only for his capabilities. I moved to a spacious and quiet alley, a home I had prepared for a long time. My father-in-law cried uncontrollably, saying, "The Hayes family, we're sorry to you." When I moved into my new home, all my younger brothers and sisters came to dinner. They didn't call me sister-in-law, they called me sister. The newly appointed great general was very busy. He was now working in the Ministry of War. Many influential families sent invitations, wanting to visit him. He refused all of them. For 10 consecutive days, he lingered outside my alley. I invited him in and served him good tea. He had lost a lot of weight, and his face was tired. When he looked at me, his eyes were still filled with sadness. "Congratulations, great general," I said. "I am not happy, my heart is shattered." "Evelyn, how can I make amends?" he asked, his voice thick with sorrow, almost bringing tears to my eyes. I was a little sad too. I didn't want to hurt anyone. "If you knew today you would abandon me, why did you save me then? When I became a cripple, why didn't you just leave me?" Every word he spoke was filled with pain. "I'm sorry," I said. "I just don't understand why you would leave me when you treated me with such sincerity. Yet you left me when I was at my most radiant," he said. I gave him my answer. 10 years ago, outside county in Cheongjo, you saved my mother's life, my brother's, and mine." He had returned to his hometown for his grandfather's funeral. We were observing a 3-year mourning period in our hometown. My father, relying on his status as a relative of the imperial family, accumulated countless riches. Local officials and wealthy gentry alike would show him deference. When we were returning to the city, we encountered bandits outside county. They not only killed the 50 guards from your family but also the escorts my father hired. Just as the bandits were about to succeed, my father, in an attempt to escape, cut the reins of the carriage and pushed the carriage, which contained my mother, my brother, and me, along with our money, into a ditch. He himself rode off on his horse. The bandits caught us then, lusting after my mother's beauty, and I was 12 years old at the time. When you were returning to the capital with your men, you passed by, killed all the bandits, recovered our money, and saved us. I spoke slowly. That memory was truly brutal. Charles Hayes also remembered. "Yes, I did kill a group of bandits at that time, but I forgot who I saved." The general, who had made a name for himself in his youth, was enjoying his glory, his mind filled with thoughts of achieving great deeds, and at that time, he was eager to return to the capital to report his duties and then return to the frontier. "You saved me. When my mother and brother suggested a marriage arrangement, I willingly married you. You could have waited one more day before setting off for war, but you ran away to avoid the marriage. I was also willing to remain a widow in the Hayes family for 6 years. When you returned injured, and the Hayes family faced hardship, that was when they needed me most, and I was even more willing to help you," I said. He was stunned. "Those funds I originally paid were claimed by my mother-in-law to have been stolen by the bandits. They were all converted into banknotes and given to me as the Hayes family's betrothal gift." I then told him something else that shocked him. With that money, my mother-in-law, my second brother-in-law, and I have been doing business. We've earned a lot. For the past 6 years, I wasn't just observing widowhood, I was also earning money. No one told him these things, not even my second brother-in-law, whose private treasury was well stocked. "I spent 8 years repaying your life-saving kindness, General. This is not a personal affection. This is loyalty," I said, smiling. Then I added, "You probably don't think women can have loyalty, do you?" He was speechless for a moment. "I still respect you," I continued. "You are a magnificent general, full of talent and ambition, but I don't intend to be an anonymous mistress behind you." "How could you be anonymous?" "Because you've never seen the real me. In your eyes, I was merely of value," I said. He didn't argue further. "General, if you love me, why would you force me?" He looked at me deeply, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm afraid I'll never marry again in this lifetime," he said. I smiled. I believed he was sincere at that moment, but people's hearts change. I also knew that he once loved Yuan so deeply, and later he came to like me. Now he felt that Evelyn was perfect in every way, but in a few more days, another Evelyn or a different woman would be just as charming. I always remembered my father's retreating figure when he abandoned my mother, my younger brother, and me. I also remembered Charles Hayes's disdainful glance away during our pre-marriage meeting. I understood from a very young age that I loved myself. I wanted to be loyal and have no regrets. I would not compromise. nor would I be moved by delayed affection. Charles Hayes never came again. My family and I were not shunned. Instead, our status soared. Matchmakers were practically trampling our doorstep. The most powerful families in the current dynasty sent people to propose marriage to me. Outside, someone rumored that I was both wise and brought good fortune, and that the Hayes family had flourished because of me. Perhaps it was my former mother-in-law who spread these rumors. Women always understand other women's situations and know what they need. I didn't immediately refuse the matchmakers. I didn't hate this world. On the contrary, I loved flowers, loved grass, loved the rising sun and the setting sun. I just didn't like insects. I was willing to try marriage again. I was willing to have children. The Empress Dowager often summoned me to the palace. In the Empress Dowager's palace, I saw Charles Hayes. He was silent, looking at me deeply. I also saw the Crown Prince. He always smiled. Evelyn doesn't like spicy food, the Crown Prince would say. Evelyn's hairstyle is loose. Evelyn, you've gotten thinner. Today's eyebrows are drawn too thin. They don't suit you. He always paid attention to my details. He liked the concrete me. 3 years after our divorce, I became the Crown Prince's second wife. I waited for you to come of age and ask my father for your hand, but you got engaged before that. The Crown Prince would complain, cuddling me at night. I waited for over a decade. He was outwardly gentle but inwardly cunning. He was my cousin, and he was the male relative I saw most often when I was a child. I knew he liked me. I knew it even when I was a child. I wasn't stupid. I could tell if a man loved me, but at that time, I didn't want to marry the Crown Prince. A man from the royal family might abandon me and flee in a crucial moment, just like my father. I wanted to marry a young general. He would never betray his wife and children, I thought, in my teens, but by my 20s, I was no longer afraid. The carriage had a place for the Crown Prince, and it had a place for me. If he ran, I could run too. Age and experience gave me confidence. I was no longer afraid. The Crown Prince still loved me, so I married him. General Charles Hayes remained as handsome and majestic as ever. Many families wanted to marry into his family, but he never married. When I gave birth to my 4th child, and was elevated to Empress, celebrating the birth of the first princess of our dynasty, it had been 10 years since my divorce from Charles Hayes. He died. He died in Bamboo Hall, in the alley. I heard that on that day, the entire Bamboo Hall was filled with fireflies. He ended his prime life with his own sword. In these years, he had been constantly fighting wars, never suffering a defeat. He had pacified the frontier and helped the emperor create a prosperous era. For the next 20 years, it was predicted there would be no wars. He could no longer sustain himself. He said he loved me his entire life, but he didn't tell me that his entire life was so short. When I heard the news of his death, a line of hot tears streamed down my face. My heart felt numb. I will forever remember that young general on the official road, who killed the bandits, his cheeks stained with a few drops of blood. He was once the courage that allowed me to live.